Hi, I'm Don DeBar. Welcome to Video Poem. You were expecting Bob. He was generous enough to allow me to host today, and I'm coming to you folks from Newcastle Community Television in Chappaqua, New York. We're recording two programs today, actually. It's March 23rd, 2011, and the program that we're going to deal with right now has to do with the situation in Libya, primarily. We'll talk a little bit about the situation in Japan, but that's going to be for the show next week. And we'll also be talking next week about some local issues, including an update on the Ossining waterfront, which you haven't heard from me about in a very long time, as well as a bond issue that's up for a vote on April 4th, excuse me, that's just shy of $70 million, and that was more or less pushed through to happen a month before the regular school board vote for the school board members and the annual budget. But we're going to talk about Libya today. First, I want to tell you what I've been up to very briefly. I haven't seen you folks, at least through the medium of television here, on a public access station for about the last 4.5, 5 years. And I've been very, very busy in the interim. In 2006, my wife had gotten sick, and she's all better now, but it was a tough year of treatment and not knowing what was going to happen. But that all worked out fine. In 2006 also, some of you will recall I was a third-party candidate for mayor of the village of Ossining. I ran on the Working Families Party line along with Marie Gagliardi, who ran for trustee, the former receiver of taxes, and Steve Kern, who's a union lawyer. He also ran for trustee. In 2006, though, I began to work. I had been involved with radio station WBAI in New York City, up to that point, but I began to get much more deeply involved producing segments for their morning drive time radio program, Wake Up Call. And then in 2007, I actually became the morning news headlines editor. I was producing the morning news segments for Wake Up Call. And as a consequence of my getting involved basically as a journalist with WBAI and then with Pacifica Radio, the network it belongs to, I ended up doing a lot of traveling. I decided that I would cover the campaign of the Green Party candidate for president in 2008, as well as the major party conventions and the primary races, particularly the primary race in the Democratic Party. So I went to San Francisco in January of 2008 for the debate among Green Party candidates, Ralph Nader, Cynthia McKinney, and some others. I was at the Green Party convention in Chicago in July of 2008. I was at the Democratic Party convention in Denver in August, and the Republican Party convention in St. Paul in September. In between an awful lot of traveling from city to city all over the country, basically, following Cynthia McKinney around as she was campaigning as the Green Party's candidate. That was in 2008. In 2009, I started getting involved with a number of community groups around the country that were working on, or that are working on, housing issues, political reform issues, to try to insert some voice of people that are disaffected by the political process in this country. It's more than half if you can gauge it by how people turn out to vote. And started working with groups of people that I had met during the presidential campaign, touring around the country into the previous year, in 2008. And the high point of 2009, I think, in terms of traveling, was a trip that I took to Tripoli in Libya in October of 2009. I was invited to be a part of a delegation of journalists and activists to this convention that was being held in Tripoli that was being convened essentially to discuss what's called third way politics and economics. The third being compared to the old bipolar world of first and second world, the Western Bloc and the old Eastern Bloc. And so I attended a conference. I was in Tripoli for about a week. I attended this conference that was organized by a group called the Society for the Propagation of the Green Book. The Green Book being a political treatise that is attributed to Muammar Gaddafi as the author, but apparently is in fact a collective effort of people who have been interested in the concepts of direct democracy, and we'll get into what that means in a little while, as well as non-capitalist economics, a sort of decentralized socialism with a good dose of say, small business thrown into the mix. So during the time that I was in Tripoli, I had the opportunity to wander around the city. I took my cameras with me and my video cameras and walked around 2 separate days. I walked around Tripoli with the cameras in my hand or my shoulder, shooting the people on the street, talking to people, walking into shops, getting an idea of what's available to people, showing people's homes, street scenes, basically the life of actual Libyans living in Tripoli, because we've had this image of how people live in Tripoli spoon-fed to us for a good 25, 30 years now. And when I was on the ground there, I saw that life was quite different from the way it had been portrayed, so I wanted to bring that back. So anyway, in 2009, that was the situation, and all the time that this stuff was going on, I'm producing the morning news for WBAI. Then there was a takeover of the radio station, and the Pacifica Network began in March of 2009, and for me ended on June 1st of 2009 when I was terminated by the new management that took over the station and the network. And the reason for that was that, for those who are familiar with WBAI, it's a listener-sponsored station, and Pacifica Network is also listener-sponsored. It's a foundation in California named Pacifica Foundation that owns it, and it's funded, though. The operating expenses are paid, and additional capital expenses funded by listeners making contributions, sort of like you see on Channel 13 or NPR. The difference being that there's no commercial underwriting of any kind at Pacifica. It's listener sponsors. So there was a management takeover in process from, say, March of 09, as I said, up to at least my termination June 1st of 09. And since I was doing the news in the morning, and since the listeners are the people that paid the bills there, I thought that the takeover of the station was newsworthy, and so for reporting on it, I was terminated. So that takes me up to June of 2009. Since then, I've been involved doing freelance journalism and working on a number of projects with particularly some of the people that I first met on the trip to Libya in October of 2009. Some of the other members of our delegation were Glenn Ford, who is the executive editor of the Black Agenda Report. You can see their work at blackagendareport.com. Glenn is a brilliant journalist, longtime activist, and a resident of the metropolitan area in New York. So he was one of the people, and another was Bob Fitrakis, the journalist from Ohio, he and Bob, along with Harvey Wasserman, broke the story about the shenanigans that went on in Ohio for the 2004 election. They also have reported on a number of other very significant national stories over the years that the mainstream media didn't cover until Bob and Harvey got the material out, and then it had to be covered. Wayne Madsen also was with us of the Madsen Report. He's an intelligence expert. He had connections with the intelligence community in the United States, and he now is regularly featured on Russia Today, RT.com, for example. He has a radio program weekly on Republic Broadcasting Network, I think it's called .com. and he writes for dozens of newspapers around the country. He's been featured in the New York Times and Miami, all of the major press, Washington Post and stuff. So I've stayed in touch with them. We've been working on developing media projects with some of the international contacts that we made while we were in Tripoli. I met journalists from South Africa, Guyana, New Zealand, Morocco, all over the globe, Russia, Belarus, France, Britain, and mostly independent journalists or indie media type journalists. And we have been in the process of trying to construct an international, pot of information that can be shared. People on the ground in, say, in Minsk at a protest can report to the whole, to the collective, and we let people in New York know about it, people in Auckland and New Zealand know about it, or whatever. So we've been working on that project, and also working on a national project with the large group of alumnus from Pacifica now that have been exiled or banned by the current management. So I've been a busy kid. And one of the things that I've been focusing on for the last few weeks, I'd say 5-6 weeks now, aside from the horrible events that took place in Japan and that are still unfolding there, was this situation in Libya particularly, the situation in the Middle East in general, Tunisia first and Egypt, but the whole condition has taken another turn with the current, we're taping on the 23rd of March now, the current invasion of Libya that's being spearheaded by the United States, joined by the UK and France and some minor players who are another coalition of the willing, or they're calling it the coalition of the unwilling now. And one thing that really is driving my attention, my paying attention to this, is the fact that I had the opportunity to spend this time in Libya and get a real feeling for what the country was about. I also had the opportunity to sit and listen to Muammar Gaddafi on 2 occasions while I was there, and in each case in excess of an hour, while he spoke about what he thought was going on in the world and what he thought needed to be done. And in addition to that, what's really piqued my interest is the knowledge that is not widely held in the United States, but my knowledge of the role that Libya has played in African politics over the last 30 years or so, we say perhaps 42 years since Gaddafi first came to power in 1969. One reflection of that role that Libya has played is the opinion of Nelson Mandela, which has been stated on numerous occasions in very public forums, and that is, in his opinion, that Muammar Gaddafi made the single largest contribution to the effort to end apartheid in South Africa of anyone outside the country. Libya had provided material support, education, all kinds of facilities, resources, and presumably even arms. I don't know that, but to listen to Mr. Mandela talk, material aid to the effort to get rid of apartheid. And so, the idea that it's commonly held in this country that Gaddafi's a nut and a loose cannon and a sponsor of terrorism and all of that, is dissonant with the facts that, that I'm aware of that, like that. Back in 1996, as a matter of fact, and in 1997, Mandela had made plans as president of South Africa to visit Libya. And there was a huge outcry from the Clinton administration at that time that he was cavorting with terrorists, and this was not a good image to project for Mr. Mandela and such. And what's interesting is that the reply from Mr. Mandela was, look, I'm a person of morals. Gaddafi and the Libyan people provided us the wherewithal to end apartheid, and at the time that that was happening, your side was supporting the government that imposed apartheid. So please don't try to tell me what I can do and can't do. Well, I brought that particular piece of information up out of a whole of interaction between Libya and other African states. And by the way, Libya is in Africa, for people that don't know that. The media treats it as if it's in the Middle East, that it has no connection to Africa. One example of that is that the Arab group's approval, we can get into that deeper if we want, but the approval of the resolution and the actions taken pursuant to the resolution permitting the bombing of Libya, the imposition of a no-fly zone, and even invasion if it seems necessary. This sanction by the Arab countries is shown as, being his colleagues, that this is, the other nations of which Libya is a part. When in fact, Libya as an African country is a member of the African Union, as is every other country on the continent of Africa, with the exception of Morocco. And the African Union, in fact, has strongly demanded that there be no intervention whatsoever from the outside in Libya, or in the dispute within Libya, or in any of the other disputes that are taking place, by the way, in Africa. Because Egypt also is in Africa, for those who haven't really been mindful of this, as is Tunisia. And those were the first two quote-unquote hotspots in the recent activities there. So, the portrayal of the whole event. Well, actually, let me go back to this point, because Mandela had brought this up, and this has been the position of South Africa for a long time. We're talking, 15 years since 1996, and 14 years since the actual visit by Mandela to Tripoli. And this is during the Clinton administration. I want to repeat that because it's germane. Last week, when the resolution was adopted at the United Nations Security Council authorizing the military activity, or some military activity, whether or not it's that which is actually taking place, one of the votes in favor of it was the Union of South Africa, or South Africa as it's now called. And the problem that created for me was, I was aware of this earlier history, and I was trying to figure out how South Africa's position had changed so drastically. I became aware of, it finally was reported here in the United States, that an awful lot of pressure was being put on the president of South Africa by Hillary Clinton, particularly the Secretary of State, and also by President Obama. And this was within the context of, a movement towards military action that only a week before the Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, had said, was not the direction to follow. That a no-fly zone would constitute, military action upon Libya. That's, getting involved in a war unnecessarily with Libya was foolish. And he was counseling publicly in the media against that course of action. And nevertheless, a week later, that was being followed, and the effort spearheaded publicly, in any event, by Hillary Clinton. Well, while that's going on, she is basically browbeating the president of South Africa negotiating for a vote at the Security Council, and separately, this is what was going on. And this was, I heard Phyllis Bennis from the Institute for Policy Studies suggest this on the radio the other day, and all of a sudden some bulbs went off in my head, because I had all the parts of this I knew, but it hadn't occurred to me to make the connection. As many of you know, Haiti is essentially a country that has a viceroy named Bill Clinton in charge of it. Former President Clinton is essentially the guy who governs the funds that have gone to Haiti for the urgent relief that's needed by the Haitian people, and which, frankly, hasn't been reaching them, passes through his hands. He's a standing member, important member of the nonprofit array that is managing the money to Haiti. Now, the Haitians are in the middle of their presidential election as we're taping, the runoff part of it. And at the time subsequent to when they had the first presidential election and then two winners for the runoff were selected, the former president of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, announced that he was going to return to Haiti. He's been in exile now since the last time he was kicked out by a coup backed by the United States. This most recent one more overtly than the previous time that had happened. Aristide announced that he wanted to go back, and he wanted to go back before the presidential election was settled. That being because right now there is no outstanding Haitian legal prohibition against him returning. And his logic was that after the election, neither of the two candidates represent a majoritarian view in Haiti. They both represent very small slices of the Haitian population, but because the majority party wasn't allowed to participate in the elections, and that's the party that Aristide belongs to, then he was afraid that when one or the other was elected, he would be barred from returning, and then hence would be barred from returning. So he announced he wanted to go back, and there was a scream from the Secretary of State's office over this, and from former President Bill Clinton, that Aristide not be allowed to return until after the election. Well, Aristide was in exile in South Africa, and all of this weight was being placed on the South African president. He got a phone call from two phone calls from President Obama. This is what's been reported, and several communications and phone calls, including phone calls from Hillary Clinton, and there have been reports also from Bill Clinton. Do not let Aristide leave. Well, at the end of last week, two things happened. One, Aristide was allowed to leave South Africa, and two, South Africa, which had proclaimed Muammar Gaddafi and Libya as heroes of their struggle against apartheid, voted to allow the United States to bomb and invade Libya. So Phyllis Bennis suggested that perhaps a deal was struck somewhere, and I wanted to give that context for the few minutes left that we have, actually. I guess I didn't talk as fast as I had hoped. Essentially what's been happening in Libya is there's a fight over the eastern part of the country with the so-called rebels, the people that are fighting the government, receiving overt now military backing from the United States and the UK and France and some other minor powers. Much of the oil activity in the country, not all by any means, but much of it goes through the eastern ports, and Benghazi is in the middle of that area. So there's that aspect to it. But this is the most important part people are not aware of. And I want to at least communicate this in the few minutes that we have left. In Libya, the people live better by every measure than the people of any other society in Africa, and also than in most of the Middle Eastern countries. And the reason for that is that the oil revenue is shared among the population in the form of a monthly check. Per household, it's in the neighborhood of $3,000 US. Now, it doesn't seem like a tremendous amount until you know that in Libya, housing is free or practically free, and people own their homes. And the homes are not shanty towns. There's a very nice, it's a very comfortable environment. Everyone has a home. Free health care, universally free health care, free education, and the food is cheap and plentiful. The shops are well stocked, and downtown Tripoli, when I was there, 15, 16 months ago, looked like Houston in the mid-'80s in terms of construction. There are cranes going up all over. That's because of the ending of sanctions 5.5 years ago, and the release of oil revenue from escrow accounts into the government began to distribute it to the people. That is the basis of the economy there. Wage labor is frowned upon as being exploitative. Small business is heavily promoted and thriving everywhere. That does not provide a basis. That kind of an economic situation does not provide a basis for the kind of uprising that's been portrayed here as taking place in Libya. It does provide a basis for what's happened in Egypt and Tunisia. Rather, the situations on the ground there does, because the people there have had very difficult times, and economically and politically, but economically, and also the economic burden is not evenly distributed, and so there's an awful lot of hostility and class antagonism in both of those places. It looks like I'm going to have to wrap this up already, and it's a shame, because I have an awful lot that I wanted to communicate about Libya that would actually inform what you're seeing go on television right now. I am very disappointed, however, that even the progressive media has been following the same script that they followed with Iraq. The leader is crazy. He kills his own people. Remember the incubator babies and such that took place supposedly in Kuwait that turned out to be false. The people will welcome us. Remember the roses that our soldiers were going to get, and it'll be over shortly. That's what we're being told now about Libya. Let's see how it plays out. So I guess next week we're not going to have an opportunity to go deeper into this, and who knows what the situation there will be. But we are going to talk about the situation with the Japanese reactors in some depth, and how that relates to for example, what we've learned about the Chernobyl accident that can help us project what may come from the Japanese accidents in terms of health effects, and what that might mean for us that live around Indian Point. And then an update about the Austin waterfront. Why are we not collecting a fine for the breach of contract that appears to be existent with the developers? And then we'll talk a little bit in depth about the school bond. They're having a special election a month before the school board election because they say interest rates were so much better and construction costs so much less in the intervening period. We know that's a lot of nonsense. Thank you for listening and watching. I hope this wasn't too crammed into too small a too small a piece of time. I'm Don DeBar. Thanks to Bob for allowing me to do this. This is VIDEOPOEM, and thank you to Newcastle Community Television for hosting this. Have a great day.